Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome once again to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where the good stuff has been delayed. You see, we were using the white ships of the Teleri for delivery, and, well, you can thank Feanor for that.
I knew there was a reason I didn't like that guy that much. Westuhal, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, and joining me from the uttermost west, the earth trembles beneath his feet when he's not sleeping from weariness and contentment. The Tolkast to my Orme, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Sean. Though you know we are going to run out of cool stuff to say about Tulkas one of these days, so I hope you have a backup plan. Well, folks, we are taking a big trip in distance and in time tonight. For the last several episodes, we've been with the Elves of the Light, the Calaquendi, the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri, what's left of them, that is, over in Valinor. Tonight, we go back in time several centuries, actually a few millennia, and back to Middle-earth in Chapter 10 of the Sindar.
Or as I like to say, Alan, we're in a gray area. Oh. You like that? Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be here all night. We will get to visit Thingol and Melian again, encounter the Dwarves for the first time since their creation by Aule, and we're going to see the first battle in the Wars of Beleriand.
And Luthien. We mustn't forget Luthien.
That's right. Luthien.
We can't forget her. But first, Sean, does Bartleman have anything in his bag for us tonight?
He does. He does. We've received more than a few threats from Feanor apologists out there.
Are they going to burn our ships?
Yeah, nothing we have to take too seriously, I don't think. They haven't gotten as far as forging weapons yet. But we also received a really, really amazing essay on one of our little outro jokes. Do you want to take a flying leap and guess which one it was?
I think you're trying to tell me something, Sean. Flying. Flying. Could it be the 5,000-word essay we received on whether Balrogs have wings?
That's the one, Alan. One of our listeners, Tom H., crafted a wonderfully clever essay of exactly 5,000 words to answer the question.
I was amazed about that. That was really good.
He got it spot on. And I don't want to spoil the surprise, so I'm just going to direct you listening at home to check it out at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we link to the full essay. Truly, truly a thing of brilliance.
I mean, we're talking PhD dissertation right here.
Yeah, it really is. And exactly 5,000 words. And boy, does he make the point.
Yeah. Well, you're going to get no argument from me, but that may be because I entirely agree with his conclusion. Is there anything else from Barnaman, the thrice worthy and beloved?
Yes, actually. Fittingly for tonight's episode, we have a couple of questions about Melian and her family back in Beleriand. So
good timing.
Yeah. So if you recall, when we last left Thingol and Melian back in Chapter 4, we mentioned that they would have a daughter, Luthien Tenuviel. And so we got some questions back then about their relationship and their daughter. And both of the questions are sort of in a similar vein.
Okay.
So the first one comes to us from Tanya P. Tanya is one of our frequent commentators. She's out in New York. And she says, Here are my musings on your latest episode. I love how your comments, even the ones spoken in jest, get me thinking of something that I wouldn't have considered otherwise. Well, thank you, Tanya. This time it was your, Alan, mention of Melian's husband hunting.
This is going to be like my trophy wife comment, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. You believed that she was not husband hunting, but I think that maybe she actually was. Let me explain. Melian was made aware by Iluvatar of his plan of passing on Ainuran divinity into the races of the earth, and that it was to be accomplished through her union with one of them. For that reason, she was actively seeking this union. The first clue to that lies in her timing of leaving Valinor. She left when the elves awoke, as if on cue.
True.
The second clue is that she didn't roam Middle-earth randomly, but stayed in the region where the majority of elves were known to be at the time, which was Beleriand.
Target-rich environment.
Yep, right. The rest is accomplished through Elwë's free will. There is also a third clue that's found later in the book. When she casts the girdle around her kingdom, which we'll see at the end of this chapter,
that's true.
Melian already knows that sooner or later, someone will come whom the girdle will not deter, and that someone will complete the final stage of Eru's plan.
Wow, that's really insightful.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's a really, really well thought out theory, as we've come to expect from Tanya. Actually, she's one of the best at laying out this kind of stuff. And I mean, I think she's right. I think she's got a point.
Something.
Yeah, I mean, It was definitely all by Iluvatar's design, and it was for the purpose, she said, of bringing among both elves and men a strain of this Ainuran blood that was with Iluvatar before Ea. We did say as much in that episode, or we alluded to it if we didn't say those exact words. And we talked about the fact that what often seems like random chance is usually a sign of Iluvatar's hand at work.
Yeah, fate, or, oh, wow, what a coincidence.
Yeah, right.
There are no coincidences.
Handy coincidence. Well, no, usually it's Iluvatar's hand.
Yep.
The question really then is just how much Melian actually knew. Tanya makes an excellent point. She may have known everything, and she may have positioned herself to be in the right place at the right time. We will see in this chapter tonight that she does have foresight, and she sees beyond just the first age. So, yeah, maybe she knew exactly what Iluvatar was planning. At a minimum, yeah, I thought so. I would say at a minimum, I would think she probably felt sort of an inexplicable urge to be in Beleriand at the right time, so that Elwë could wander by.
Yeah.
Not to... Well, this is something that you know more about, but it seems to me in like in biblical stories and things like that, God's chosen instruments usually sort of feel a call that they can't quite explain. They just sort of they know where they need to be, and they need to be there, but they don't know why. And I wonder if maybe there could have been something of that in Melian. She just kind of felt an urge to be there without knowing exactly why.
That's an interesting point. And that actually kind of, when you bring up that last point, it does make me think that maybe she had some conscious awareness because actually in most biblical stories, at least the ones that I can think of off the top of my head, but if you look in the Old Testament, you look at the prophets, God gives them exact instructions. I mean, where to go, what to do, what to wear. I mean, everything. He lays out all the details, and they go do it because God has told them to do it. So it's more than just a call. It's usually, at least in the Old Testament stories that I can
more of a command.
It's more of a command. Yeah, that's an interesting point because that little thing that you brought up at the end does make me think that being who she is, being a Maya, it actually makes sense. She may not even just been specifically husband hunting. She might have been specifically Elwë hunting even. I mean, I don't know, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it was that specific.
Look for this guy, Melian.
Yeah, he's really tall.
Right,
he's really
exactly.
Tall. And he likes to go for long walks alone in the woods. That's on his Match.com profile.
Right, right, exactly. But it's an intriguing, really intriguing couple of points raised by Tanya, and maybe it wasn't pure chance. Maybe she really knew what she was doing.
Yeah. Whereas I think other times where we see Iluvatar's hand at work, the people that are being used by Iluvatar's hand, let's say for example Bilbo finding the ring, where he was essentially manipulated into that, and I don't mean manipulated in a negative sense. I just mean he certainly wasn't aware of his role in fulfilling any sort of prophecy.
He was a chess piece, a piece on a board.
Right,
that was,
exactly.
That was
like Gandalf says, you're just one small person in the world
after all. Yeah.
Which is one of the best closing lines ever, really. I can't wait till we get to that in about 4 years. But actually, it won't be that long. I think we were looking at our timeline on this, and it's only a year before we're done with this.
Yeah.
And then we'll be tackling The Hobbit. So probably 2 years.
Hobbit.
Yeah, because that's only... What is like? How many chapters? 12? Something like that?
19.
19, that's right. So 12, 19, 37.
Whatever,
It's all something. It's all more than 2.
It's right.
I can't count past 2 these days.
Right.
But that'll probably be, if it's 19, then it'll be 19 episodes. So it'll probably be 2.5 to 2.5 years. But so we'll get there. I think we'll actually get there.
I think so.
It might be, when we talk about things like Unfinished Tales, that might be a pipe dream that we're still on the air then. But I think it's realistic to think we'll get to the end of The Hobbit at least.
I think we can make it to the end of The
Hobbit. Fascinating insight. And thank you, Tanya. That really did tie things together. I have to say, I think you're probably onto something there.
I think so, yeah.
And once again, she has corrected me.
Yes, she's good at that.
She's astounding at that. Actually,
getting a comment from Tanya is always a reason to stop and think. We've probably missed something because she knows those History of Middle Earth texts better than
me. That's for sure.
Better than me for sure. Yeah.
So then we have something else. We have another question along those same lines, right?
We did. We got another question from Nakat, another friend of the show.
Yeah.
Yep. She's one of our friends in Lahore, Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
She writes in saying, the Ainur generally don't have kids. but Melian did.
Mm-hmm.
She says, granted, Luthien was half and half, Ainur and Firstborn, or Elf, but it does show that the Valar could have children too if they chose.
I'd
What do you think of that?
Well, I'd probably have to disagree with that, with the conclusion that she draws from it. She's right to say that Ainur generally don't have kids. We're given 2 examples of Ainur that do. We already talked about one, and that was Ungoliant, who we came to the conclusion that she was a Maya.
Assuming she is a Maya, yeah.
And that she was able to reproduce. But like we see with Melian, she reproduced because she mated with a flesh and blood, mortal. Yeah, mortal. I say that when I'm talking about Elway, but I mean
sure.
different
maybe
than
terrestrial or
right.
Incarnate.
Terrestrial is a good one. Incarnate. I like that word. We use that a lot, and it's a good one. And that's my take on this: is that Melian was only able to procreate precisely because she married one of the children of Iluvatar. If she was married to another Maya or to a Vala, I honestly don't think offspring would have been possible, because we see marriage. Between the Valar, for instance, and presumably also amongst the Maiar, but with no offspring. And it would seem weird that it never, ever, ever happens except in these 2 instances, and both of them share that one commonality. It just doesn't seem to me like it was part of Iluvatar's plan to allow the Ainur to reproduce. And I think we got to understand the nature of what they are. An Ainu, whether Vala or Maya, an Ainu is an offspring of Iluvatar's thought.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't reproduce something that's of Iluvatar's thought.
Right. They're there to subcreate, not to procreate.
Exactly. That's a great little distinction. But because elves and men were designed to procreate by Iluvatar himself, Thingol could have kids. So it was more about the fact that Thingol could reproduce. And so he was even though he married a Maya. And so that was kind of the exception that proves the rule. In fact,
what's sort of intriguing about that is that once that rule had been established, or once Melian had procreated with Thingol, then you get Ungoliant, assuming that she's actually a Maya.
Sure.
Does the rule now apply to any Ainu that chooses to mate with an incarnate creature?
I don't know. I mean, my hunch is yes, because the incarnate creature was intended by Iluvatar to reproduce.
Right. So by virtue of the incarnate creature, that's why the Maya is able to reproduce. Though, we would have to assume that, with the exception of Melian, only a corrupted Ainu would choose to do that, because
that's true.
Because it would be going against nature.
Unless Iluvatar had specifically instructed them to, like he did with
Melian.
It appears he might have done with Melian. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a good question.
It's very interesting.
Good stuff. And
it's also worth pointing out, I will point this out really quickly before we move on, that in the early versions of the Legendarium, if you look at things like the Book of Lost Tales, the Valar did have children.
Yes.
But and I'm sure somebody might point that out. Well, the Valar did have children. Well, yes, in that early version, but that's really not considered canonical by the time we get down to the Silmarillion. And clearly in the finished published Silmarillion, the intention was that the Valar did not have children.
Exactly, and that's the thing. There are a lot of things that show up in the Book of Lost Tales that get changed. Mm-hmm. And while it's always interesting to look at that as a means of the development of the story, when the published version conflicts with the Book of Lost Tales, clearly the published version wins.
Always go with the published version. Yep.
We can look at, for example, or even just later, usually trumps earlier. I'm thinking of the fact that elves, the reincarnation,
like the reincarnation of elves.
The reincarnation of elves that went away.
Right.
And eventually they become rehoused as adults, because that was more consistent with his personal beliefs as well.
Right. Yeah.
So you just published trumps unpublished, and later trumps earlier.
Yep, that's a good way of thinking of it.
So good stuff. And I hope that we have some more questions next time when we get to Of Sun and Moon. But tonight, let's just dig into this discussion. I thought this was going to be a short chapter when I first looked at it, but the more I looked at it, the longer it's going to be. I don't think we're going to approach the 2 hours of 2 episodes ago with the first half of Return of the Noldor. I mean, of the Flight of the Noldor. Mm-hmm. But this won't be a short one.
before we get into the discussion, we want to suggest that you pull up a secondary resource to use as we go through the chapter. So I know some of you are listening on mobile devices and you might be doing something else. You might not be able to pull up a web page and look at it. If you're driving, please do not do that.
Oh, goodness, no, please.
But if you are at a place where you can pull up, a website on a screen, please do, because this is a geography-heavy chapter, and we think you'll benefit from a good map, and we've found one. We suggest going to a website called loaderproject.com. That's LOTR, like Lord of the Rings, project.com. And when you get to their homepage, the first thing you'll see, I think, is the family tree, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of neat, but we don't want you to worry about that right now.
Yeah, because it's probably going to be more confusing than helpful for the newer readers. But what you'll want to do actually is click on Maps up at the top, near the upper left, and then after the map of Middle-earth shows up, don't get distracted by that really cool map. You can explore it later when you're not listening to us. You'll use it when we get to Lord of the Rings, of course. But click instead on Map of Beleriand. That's over in the upper right-hand corner of the map. So again, lotrproject.com. Pause this if you need to pull this up first. And then click on Maps at the upper left and then Map of Beleriand in the upper right. Mm-hmm. Sean and I are going to have this map up on our monitors as we go through this podcast, so we'll be referencing it fairly often. And we'll definitely use it again, even if the only other time we use it is Chapter 14
for
of
sure.
Beleriand and its realms.
Yep, definitely.
And one other thing, we want to give a shout-out to the folks who put this together. It is a site that relies on donations. It's, as you can imagine, when you look at this site and explore it, there was a ton of effort, a ton of love, and a ton of work put into it. So, we want to encourage you guys as our listeners to throw them $1 or $2, maybe more if you're able to just, thank them and help them be able to keep this amazing resource online for all those Tolkien fans. So now that you have that,
and it really is cool. It really is an
amazingly
resource.
cool. Yeah. And you'll be able to look at other stuff like timelines and some really cool stats. I mean, it's the amount of effort they put into this. I say they. It's pretty much one guy. Is absolutely astounding. But yeah. And
we'll put a link up on the website too. Mm-hmm. So those of you listening to this later can
and on the Facebook page too.
Yep.
Okay. Well, now that we have that little thing out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the discussion itself. I'm going to start by reading the first paragraph. We'll just start right there.
Okay.
Now, as has been told, the power of Elwë and Melian increased in Middle-earth, and all the elves of Beleriand, from the mariners of Círdan to the wandering hunters of the Blue Mountains beyond the river Gelion, owned Elwë as their lord. Elu Thingol he was called, King Greymantle, in the tongue of his people. They are called the Sindar, the grey elves of starlit Beleriand. And although they were Morroquendi, under the lordship of Thingol and the teaching of Melian, they became the fairest and the most wise and skillful of all the elves of Middle-earth. So we'll stop there. Okay. We've got a couple of big points here. We get the lordship of Elu Thingol. We get the teaching of Melian. The fact that the Sindar are incredibly wise, skillful, and fair.
It raises them above the level of the level of enlightenment of all the other Morroquendi. Yeah,
exactly. Especially of the Avari, the ones that had refused the journey earlier, but even the other Eldar, the ones that had began that journey.
Right.
And it has a large part to do with the fact that they're under the kingship of Thingol, who has seen the light of Aman.
Right.
And under the the teaching of Melian, they've got a Maya amongst them.
Yep.
So definitely some big things there.
Yeah.
And I think you had a thing about the tying Feanor in here, right?
Yeah, well, there's this idea that all the elves of Beleriand owned Elwë, or Elu Thingol, we're about to start calling him, as their lord. So remember Feanor's big thing that he said in Flight of the Noldor about, and even before that, about winning great realms back in Middle-earth.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the elves in Middle-earth already have a lord. They're not looking for a new one. So, it's like...
I will ask him
going to find?
I will ask him if he needs another lord, but I don't think he'd be very keen. He already has one, you see.
Oh, man.
I had to get a Python reference in there.
You had to get a Python reference in.
Well, he already has one.
Exactly.
You're right.
Like,
What's he going to do? I mean, I guess he's going to do what he did to the Teleri. I mean,
well, exactly. He's already struck out at the Teleri once. He's the only way he's going to win great realms is by taking them from somebody else.
Yeah.
He doesn't know that yet, but
no.
We know now.
And why not? These are more, in the case of Thingol, he's another Teleri.
Right.
He's the brother of the guy and that's going to play really well when they get back.
Yes.
But we'll get to that in a few chapters.
Oh, man, when he finds out about that, that's not going to go well.
Not a pleasant time.
Nope.
But one thing is interesting is we find out in the very next line that this is the end of the first age of the chaining of Melkor.
Yeah.
So we really kind of need to talk a little bit about timeline. So we see that Luthien's born at the end of the first age of Melkor's imprisonment. Now, this is where we have to pull in some more information, right? We pulled in some stuff from Morgoth's Ring, specifically from the Annals of Aman. We know that Christopher Tolkien says there that time indeed began with the beginning of Ea, and in that beginning the Valar came into the world. But the measurement in which the Valar made of the ages of their labors is not known to any of the children of Iluvatar until the first flowering of Telperion in Valinor. We've talked about that, the years of the trees. Mm-hmm. After that point, the Valar counted time by the ages of Valinor. Each age contained 100 of the years of the Valar. So you'd think, an age is only 100 years. Except that each of the years of the Valar was almost 10 years. In fact, and I don't know how they came up with this number, but it's like 9.52. I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure there was something in a footnote about how that was calculated, and I could pull that up at some point, but not right now because I only have that in hard copy. But it is 9.52, so or 9.5, it's something like that. It's just a hair over 9.5. And we do get a little bit from that. We actually do start getting a little bit of referencing of time. We do know that he was sentenced to his imprisonment in the year 4600, first age, but that's 4600 Valinorian years. So this is a very long time from the birth of the trees. And then he was released 300 years later, but that's not 300 of our years. That's almost 3,000.
300 Valian years. Yeah.
300 Valinorian years. So
we're talking, we're talking something like 40. I mean, like my math is going to be really rough, but like 45,000 years, something like that.
Yeah, 45,000 years or so between the time of the trees to the time that Melkor was sentenced. And then 300 years later, or 3,000 years later, in terms of our years, when he was released.
That is mind-boggling,
isn't it? So she was born in 4700, at the end of the end of the first age of his imprisonment. So we know that, and the Valinorian years are measured, by the way, until the year 5000 when the moon rises.
Okay.
So we saw the moon rise at the very end of last chapter, and we'll get to understand how the moon rose when we get to next chapter.
In our next episode, yeah.
But we know that happened in the year 5000. So she was around for 300 Valinorian years, plus 464 years after that when she met Beren. So she was 3,419 years old when she first meets Beren in about, 9 chapters. So just to get a feel for the vastness of the time.
Cradle robber.
How did I know that was coming? Yeah.
But she does look great for her age.
She does. You know what? The elves really developed the first plastic surgery. Nobody knows that. Shh, don't tell anyone.
Elvish magic.
Elvish magic.
It's an elvish art, a fairy art.
Oil of Olay.
Oil of Olway.
I almost did a spit take on my microphone, Sean. Thank you very much. Oil of Olay.
Right over the plate.
Oh, that was beautiful. That was a beautiful thing. We might get mail on that one.
Thank you very much.
So I just had to do that little time sidebar to just help folks out with just how vast these times are. I mean, this chapter covers an insane amount of time. Thousands of years between Luthien's birth and...
It really is truly mind-boggling. And it's, 9 pages?
I know. This may actually be the longest chapter, aside from chapter 1 of the beginning of days, where we literally don't know how long that was. But anyway, so let me go ahead and read that second half of the paragraph now that we have that in mind.
Let's talk about Luthien,
So at the end of the first age, with the chaining of Melkor, when all the earth had peace, and the glory of Valinor was at its noon, there came into the world Luthien, the only child of Thingol and Melian. Though Middle-earth lay, for the most part, in the sleep of Yavanna, in Beleriand, under the power of Melian, there was life and joy, and the bright stars shone as silver fires. And there, in the forest of Neldoreth, Luthien was born, and the white flowers of Nifredil came forth to greet her as stars from the earth.
I love that image.
Isn't that beautiful?
Greet her as stars from the image. Greet her as stars from the earth.
There's no flowers because everything's in the sleep of Yavanna, but the Nifredil show up, you know?
Yeah.
Melian's got some power.
And the idea of stars from the earth, I just love this. It just reminds me of it's a bringing together of the heavens, the stars, and the earth. And that's Luthien, isn't it?
You're
because
right, it is.
She's a creature of angelic or, Ainu blood and terrestrial blood from her father.
Wow, that's a really cool insight and beautiful too.
Yeah, it's so cool.
That is cool.
There's all these little things about it. The way, I always feel like Luthien and Melian and Thingol, they're so tied to the land they live in.
Oh, they really are.
In a way that, we just don't, I mean, it's one of those real legendary kind of mythical things that you see a lot, maybe in Arthurian legend and things like that. But you really see it a lot with them. It's really cool.
You do. Wow. Well, and there was one other thing. We probably should have touched on this earlier because it's geography related, but I noted at the beginning of the chapter that all the elves of Beleriand, from the mariners of Círdan to the wandering hunters of the Blue Mountains beyond the River Gellion. So if you're looking at that map, we did have you pull up Loader Project for a reason. The mariners of Círdan were in the Falas. So if you look in the middle of that map of Beleriand, there's Doriath. Now look all the way to the west coast and south just a little bit. There's the Falas.
It's right. Okay. Probably right on the edge of your screen if you're on the default magnification.
Yeah. And so there it is. There's a river that goes there to Eglarest, and then you can kind of see that bay between Falas and West Beleriand. Mm-hmm. So that's the area that Círdan is. And then you have all the way over to Doriath in the middle. River Gellion is the north-south river all the way to the right, just to the west of the Ered Luin.
So if you're looking at the map, that's between the regions of Estelad and Thargelion.
Yes, between East Beleriand or Estelad there and Thargelion. That north-south river is the River Gellion with all those tributaries in Osirian down in the south. Mm-hmm. That's a very important river. It's not as important as Sirion, which is the one that splits goes just to the west of Doriath and splits the other forests there. But so that's all of Beleriand. It's a huge realm.
Yep.
So even though we later see that Thingol and Melian will eventually kind of close in Doriath and Neldoreth behind the girdle, their realm stretches all the way from the coast to the mountains.
Yeah.
It's a huge realm.
It is the entire east-to-west expanse of Beleriand, really. Yeah,
and we don't get a north-south here, but I believe at this point its northern line would probably be the Ered Gorgoroth, and perhaps the pass there with Sirion.
The pass is it the pass of Anach? Yeah.
Yeah. Near Tol Sirion on the west, and then up by Imring in the east. So that would more than likely be the northern border, and I don't have any idea how far south. I don't know whether they commanded stuff all the way down to the Bay of Valar, though we do know that the Falathrim did end up going there. We'll get to that later.
Right.
So anyway, just kind of wanted to lay out a little bit of the land.
Really huge realm.
It is. It's a big realm. This is not a minor kingship. That's really the point that we're trying to make here. So
right.
Well, so what do we get after the most beautiful thing in all of Middle-earth? We get...
we get the dwarves. And they're a stocky and practical people. We haven't seen them since chapter 2.
Are. No.
Actually. When they were, if you recall in chapter 2, they were created by Aule, got his hand slapped by Iluvatar a little bit, and Iluvatar put them to sleep. Yes. But now we actually get them appearing, and I'd like to go ahead and read from that first paragraph there.
Please do.
Themselves they named Khazad, but the Sindar called them Naugrim, the stunted people, and Gonhirim, masters of stone. Far to the east were the most ancient dwellings of the Naugrim, but they had delved for themselves great halls and mansions, after the manner of their kind, in the eastern side of Ered Luin, and those cities were named in their own tongue Gabilgothal and Tumunzahar. To the north of the great height of Mount Dolmed was Gabilgothal, which the elves interpreted in their tongue Belagost, that is Mickelberg. And southward was delved Tumunzahar, by the elves named Nogrod, the Hollowbold. Greatest of all the mansions of the dwarves was Khazad-dûm, the Dwarodelf, Hadhadrand in the Elvish tongue, that was afterwards, in the days of its darkness, called Moria. But it was far off in the mountains of mist beyond the wide leagues of Eriador, and to the Eldar came but as a name and a rumor from the words of the dwarves of the Blue Mountains.
And that's actually way off the map, because to place this in context, the Ered Luin are the mountains that, if you were looking at a map of Middle-earth, are on the far western shore. These are the ones that are to the west of the Shire. So, so this is, Moria is way to the east and to the south of this realm.
And that's why the elves of Beleriand are not having any kind of concourse with the dwarves of Moria, but they are hearing about them from these dwarves of the Blue Mountains, the Ered Luin, in Belagost and Nogrod.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we don't see the dwarves awake. We just see them start to appear.
Yeah, they just show up.
Yeah.
But I think that's really easily explained by the fact that what we're reading is an Elvish history. It's written by the elves, about the elves primarily. We don't even get definitive answers about men's origin.
That's true. Yeah.
Basically, if the elves don't know, if the elves don't know, it's not in here.
Right.
It's and that's something we have to remember, is the fictional framework, or the structure in which his stories fit. In this case, this is an Elvish tale. I'm sure that the man's version of the Silmarillion would be quite different. Yeah. Certainly the dwarves.
And it's sometimes frustrating as a human reader to want to know.
It is.
You want to know what the origin is of men in this world, maybe what the origin of dwarves or origin of other things. But it is we might consider it an in-universe document. It's the elves' own perspective. It's a limited perspective document.
That's a good way to put it, limited perspective. And, it makes me also think of the fact that we don't know, the elves talk about what they know about their death. We know everything about their death, the fact that they get rehoused and the fact that they live as long as Arda does and all of that.
Right.
That they're bound to the circles of the world. They don't know what happens to men, and they don't know what happens to dwarves. We get a couple of Tolkien's famous "some say" statements.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
But that's really all we get. And again, it's because it's an Elvish story.
Right. Right.
Now I noticed.
We do get some cool dwarvish language here, which I like.
Hey, before we get into that, because I know we've got a ton of stuff on dwarvish language, I just wanted to point out the ticking clock that we talk about. Before the passage you read, we learned that this came to pass during the second age of the captivity of Melkor. So now,
thank you. Yeah,
100 Valinorian years, or 982 years, into the future from the birth of Luthien.
Okay.
So, or we're somewhere in that range. We're somewhere between birth of Luthien and 982 years later, when the second age of captivity would end.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good perspective. Cool.
So you've got some dwarvish word nerd stuff, right?
Oh yeah. Well, you know me. When I see a whole bunch of weird words that are hard to pronounce, I'm gonna spend a lot of time looking into it. So the first thing we get here is the dwarves' name for themselves, which is Khazad.
Right.
And remember that Aule actually taught the dwarves their own language, right? Back in chapter 2.
And I'm sure their name for themselves does not mean the stunted people.
It probably does not.
My goodness, the elves lack tact, don't they?
They really do.
And Gonhirim just sounds like it's some sort of horrible disease.
Yeah.
Is there an antibiotic for that?
Oh man, that's wow. I never thought about that, but I'm never going to forget that now. The Gonhirim. I got the Gonhirim.
Oh man.
Oh man. Yeah.
I'm going to get in trouble for this one.
But so let me reel it back in.
I'm going to have to pause the recording, aren't I? We're just going to laugh too hard. Okay. Yeah. On a word nerd alert, let's actually point out that Gonhirim, this is probably the only word nerd part I'm going to get, so I'm going to jump in on it. remember how we talked about Gondor, and we talked about doors before, door being kingdom or realm. So
Yep.
Gondor is the realm of stone, and you get other doors. So you already know that Gon is stone, and
Right.
Hirim, we already know the Rohirrim, which are the horse
That's
masters.
true, the masters of horses. Yeah.
So you don't need to know. Tolkien doesn't need to tell you here that this is masters of stone. You already know that Rohirrim are the horse masters, and that Gondor is the kingdom of stone. So
Yeah, that's
Gonhirim is the masters of stone.
Masters of Stone. Yeah. Yeah. So you see, the language works. The rules are followed throughout.
Indeed, they are.
Well, and the cool thing about this word Khazad, which is the dwarves' name for themselves, is that if you've read Lord of the Rings, you've already seen this word. Gimli's
yes.
battle cry that he cries out at the Battle of Helm's Deep in Two Towers is Baruch Khazad, Khazad Aimenu, which means the axes of the dwarves are upon you.
Aha.
So now there's that translated.
And Khazad-dûm, right?
And Khazad-dûm, that's true, yeah.
yeah.
Which we'll see in a moment, is translated. Well, actually, we just saw it. Is translated as Dwaro-Delph, which is one of Tolkien's not so helpful translations.
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. That's like talking about the hill.
Right. Exactly.
Because isn't that just like Dwarf City or something like that?
It's dwarf
Delving.
Dwarf delving. Yeah, exactly.
Dwarfs dug this hole. That's what it means.
Right, exactly.
Dwarves were here.
And maybe it's worth a quick look back at the map real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. The geography of this is important. So we look first at, look over towards the River Gelion, where we were talking earlier, and you'll see that about halfway down the Ered Luin, just to the east of that, is Mount Dulmid, sticking out a little bit to the west, just above all the tributaries to the Osirian, to the Gelion, in Osirian.
To the Gelion, yeah.
So if you look just to the other side of the Ered Luin, you can see there Belegost to the north and Nogrod to the south, and you can see a dotted road, a dotted path leading along the river there. That's the Dwarf Road.
The Dwarf Road, fittingly named.
That then goes to the ford of the river there at
Sarnathrod. Yeah.
So from there, they would then, travel through Beleriand to Doriath, or perhaps all the way wherever they needed to go. Though I would imagine it was pretty much to Doriath, because now I'm looking at, certainly to the south of Doriath, they wouldn't have wanted to go. The Fens of Sirion would have made it hard for them to pass through there. They would have had to go all the way down around that mountain range and go over Sirion to the south if they wanted to get into West Beleriand, to get to Nargothrond or anything like that.
Right.
We know they didn't really go any further. They didn't go to the Falas. They didn't like the water. So
no, they did not.
We'll get some more of that.
Yeah. So I want to take another moment on some of these names, just because there's
I was about to ask
cool
you to do that,
names.
my word nerd friend. Please do.
Yes, please. Thank you. So this just a couple of just these names here. So the first one, the northern fortress called Belegost, which in Dwarvish is Gabilgathal. Very strong, powerful name there. And it's translated as Mickelberg, which
I didn't quite.
It's not really all that helpful if you're not a philologist. Tolkien did this a lot. Mickelberg is actually English, technically. It's just Tolkien often would create new modern English words from Old English or Middle English roots that don't really exist anymore in modern English.
Oh, okay.
And so Mickelberg is one of these. It actually translates to mighty fortress, which is pretty much a direct translation of Belegost.
Yeah,
And then we've got in the south Tumunzahar, also known as to the elves as Nogrod, and it's translated as Hollowbold. Hollowbold, actually, I looked this up, and Hollowbold is actually a literal translation of Tumunzahar, but Nogrod actually means something different. Nogrod means dwarf cave.
Oh, okay.
Again, the elves not being too tactful.
Naugrim.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Now, like Naugrim. I think that's the.
And Finrod.
Sindar and Former.
That's
right.
Felagund. Felagund is the cave thing.
Oh, right. Felagund is Lord of
Hewer
Caves.
of Caves,
Yeah. But I think it is related to Elrond, which is like a star vault, like chamber with a vaulted ceiling of stars. Yeah.
Interesting.
Rond vaulted ceiling is related to cave. And we actually see Rond again in the elvish name of Khazad-dûm.
You're right.
Right.
And Khazad-dûm.
Yeah, Rond being chamber with a vaulted roof, and then Hadad just being it's not actually a translation, it's just a sort of an Elvish attempt at pronouncing the word Khazad.
Oh, okay. So more of a transliteration than a translation. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, of course, later on, known as Moria, which means Black Chasm, but that doesn't happen until later after the great wingless darkness is discovered.
I knew you had to get that in there. Very cool. Very cool. Well, and then we talk a little bit about Khazad-dûm, and that the elves of Eregion in that region would later be friends with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm.
That's true.
We look at the Holland Gate. Celebrimbor, who is a grandson of Feanor through Caranthir or Curufin. I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's Curufin, yeah.
Curufin, yeah. He's the son of Curufin, renounces Curufin's actions later on. And, of course, he's the guy who forges the Elvish rings.
Right.
And also is the one who is mentioned by name in the
inscription on the gate.
Inscription on the gate.
Right.
So, but at this point, remember, those are different elves. Those aren't the same elves. And that's way into the Second Age.
Right.
So these Sindar are not necessarily, they're not dealing with the elves of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm.
Right. Because they're just not there. They're not going that far east.
No, they're not. Well, let me take a little passage here on how the elves kind of deal with the dwarves, kind of their thoughts about the dwarves. Though I think we can already assume some of those thoughts based on
we
what
probably
they call
know
them.
a little bit about how they felt about calling them the stunted people
and Gonerim. So I'm going to take a little bit down this paragraph here from Nogrod and Belagast. I'm going to go down about halfway down, or 2/3 of the way down. Ever cool was the friendship between the Naugrim and the Eldar, though much profit they had one of the other. But at that time, those griefs that lay between them had not yet come to pass, and King Thingol welcomed them. But the Naugrim gave their friendship more readily to the Noldor in after days than to any others of elves and men, because of their love and reverence for Aule, and the gems of the Noldor they praised above all other wealth. Well, we just talked a little bit about that, actually, because Celebrimbor, of course, would have been a Noldor.
Right.
But yeah, they're friends with the Noldor because of Aule. But let me handle the rest of the paragraph. Sorry, I got distracted there.
Yeah.
So in the darkness of Arda already the dwarves wrought great works, for even from the first days of their fathers they had marvelous skill with metals and with stone. But in that ancient time iron and copper they loved to work, rather than silver or gold. Very practical critters, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we talked about this a little bit a couple of episodes ago, I think, with Morgoth's Iron Crown.
Yeah, just I think last episode, I think.
Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe the other one, you're right.
Maybe the one before that. But we just talked about how iron is, a utilitarian metal, practical, not beautiful. Now, I'm not trying to draw a comparison between the dwarves and Morgoth here, but certainly between the dwarves and practicality. They're not fancy. They're not ornamental. They're
silver or gold, clearly decorative metals. You're not going to make they're far too soft to use in weapons or armor. Yep. Well, so is copper for that matter, but copper's plentiful, and you can use it for cooking and things along those lines. Not to mention electricity, which I'm sure the dwarves had already invented by now.
Oh, for sure, yeah. sure, they're probably electroplating all their mail.
But yeah, so it's they're looking at practical uses of metal at this point.
Yeah, certainly
in stone.
And that's the dwarves all over. They're just like you said. They're a practical people, tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then we get to the construction of Menegroth, don't we?
Well, there are a couple other things I think we wanted to mention about. Well, at least one other thing we wanted to mention about this passage or about something we didn't read, but it was earlier about the. They could understand no word of the tongue of the Naugrim, which to their ears was cumbrous and unlovely.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I thought that was interesting that they, the dwarves were quick to learn, and they were willing to learn the Elven tongue, but they weren't so willing to teach their own.
No,
and that was okay with the elves because they didn't want to. It was ugly.
Yeah, right.
Really.
Well, what's cool about that is, the one book that I know both of us have read recently is the new edition of A Secret Vice.
Yes.
That was edited by Dimitra Fimi and Andrew Higgins.
Yes.
And one of the the new things that they unearthed in publishing that volume was Tolkien's essay on phonetic symbolism, which has a ton of cool stuff in it. But one of the things that's mentioned in that essay is this idea of phonetic predilection, and it's basically the idea.
Again?
Phonetic predilection. It's basically a predilection for certain kinds of phonetic sounds. And it's basically the idea that certain people, whether it's individuals or groups, races, and so forth, have a preference for certain kinds of sounds. And the phonology of a language is like inextricably tied to the people who speak it. So, there's a reason that English sounds like English, because people who natively speak English just have a predilection for English sounding sounds.
Fascinating.
And the same with any other Germanic language or, Japanese, the people of Japan, they just have a predilection for certain kinds of sounds just because of where they live. It's an interesting theory. I don't think it's a theory that Tolkien totally, applied his entire life, but it's really interesting here because I think that's sort of at play here because, you get the idea that the elves are a beautiful, elegant people, and they speak a beautiful, elegant language.
True.
And the dwarves are kind of cumbrous and unwieldy, unlovely people, and their language is similar. And so the elves just can't get their mouths around this language of the dwarves.
This language that's filled with consonants and really hard sounds, and
yeah,
that's interesting.
Hard sounds like chazad, things like that.
That's true, because we got to remember it's not kazad, it's chazad. It's that that back of your throat, almost like a German ch. I forget what they call that. But
there's a word for that kind of consonant, and I'm not gonna guess because I'm gonna
can't remember.
Make myself sound silly, but somebody knows it.
I'm sure they do.
but it's just a really cool thing, and I think just because I recently read that, I was thinking of that. But
that is interesting. Yeah, I've been reading that edition of A Secret Vice, and it is challenging to get through, not being as much of a word nerd as you are, but it's definitely worth the read.
Yeah, it really is. I highly recommend it to anybody out there. If you're in the U.S., you might have to get a UK edition, because I don't think
it's available here, isn't it?
Is it available here now?
I got mine from the UK. Yeah, I ordered mine from the UK because I wanted to get it when it first came out. I wanted to get the first edition, but I'm fairly sure it is available.
Maybe it's out in the U.S. now.
We'll find out, and we'll put a link in our library for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One way or the other. So it may be a UK link, but if you're here in the U.S., you can get that. You just have to pay a little bit more for shipping.
Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, very interesting. You were talking about the fact that they're ready to adapt other languages, the dwarves are, but not to teach their own. You talked about that in terms of culture, I think, right?
Yeah, because, every detail about language is significant in Tolkien's work. And so by saying that the dwarves are ready to adapt, or adopt, I guess I should say, the language of the elves, rather than teach their own language to the elves, that's really a way of saying that they're protective of their own culture. They don't want to share their language and culture with the elves. They would rather assimilate to the culture of the people, around them, which is just a very interesting thing. This idea of a sort of a wandering, protective people. It's reminiscent of some cultures in our own world. The word that pops into my mind is they seem kind of like a culture in diaspora.
Absolutely.
Kind of like maybe even I don't know. I don't know if Tolkien had really based them on either the Jews or the Romani or anything like that, but there's definitely some of those that you see pop up throughout medieval literature that the dwarves are sort of reminiscent of.
Definitely. Well, and you know what? They are actually, I was thinking about that. I was reading recently. It was an interview. I was reading something about the fact that Tolkien based the dwarves, at least in part, on the Jewish culture. And in an interview with the BBC, he said that he didn't intend it. So it clearly wasn't something that he, chose to do at the beginning. He said, but when you've got these people on your hands, you've got to make them different, haven't you? And I'm quoting Tolkien here. The dwarves, of course, are quite obviously, wouldn't you say that in many ways they remind you of the Jews? Their words are Semitic, obviously, constructed to be Semitic. The hobbits are just rustic English people. So he even recognized that there was some tie in there. And then John Ratliff, the author of The History of the Hobbit, in that volume talked about how Tolkien drew inspiration from Hebrew texts and Jewish history in developing the dwarves. But that makes sense, especially if you think about it from the perspective of the Hobbit. maybe not so much here, but I mean, once he created the dwarves were created. But Thorin's people specifically, they remember their past with their tragic past with mournful songs.
Mm-hmm.
They are craftsmen exiled from a wonderful homeland. They have no home.
Right.
And keep in mind that when Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, the Jews didn't have a home. Israel did not exist as a state.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's that. Yeah. So they were definitely this kind of, like you said, diaspora. A people kind of spread out in various cultures. So they'd assimilated into different cultures, but all had their common language and their common culture that they kind of kept to themselves in some respects.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
It certainly is. There's certainly elements of that. I mean, obviously we're not saying that. There's certainly not an allegory or anything like that.
The dwarves are not the Jews. The Jews are not the dwarves.
Exactly.
This isn't a one-to-one allegory.
Exactly, but Tolkien, a lot of influences went into the soup.
Well,
and certainly there were some real-world historical influences.
And I think he wanted to make them good because there's two things that go into this. Of course, one is his Christian background, and Christianity is often viewed in recent history. I mean, obviously, if you go back to, medieval ages, medieval times, Christianity.
There was a lot of anti-Semitism.
There was anti-Semitism, certainly, but in more modern times, Christianity is viewed as an ally of Judaism for obvious theological reasons. But there's that. There's the fact that he would have viewed himself as being kind of on the same side. But there's also the fact that he really despised Wagner and he despised Hitler big time. And and Wagner, I mentioned Wagner because in his rings, or in his ring, the dwarf was the stereotypical representation of a Jew, and he was a bad guy.
Right.
And I think, Tolkien wanted to have the, heroic dwarves that represented this kind of idea of the Jews.
Yeah, I think you're right.
He definitely wanted to rescue that because I loved I don't have the quote in front of me, but he at one point was answering something from Germany, and he talked about how I guess they'd inquired about a German translation, and I think they made it sound like we want to make sure you don't have any Jewish background and.
Oh wow!
And I really wish I could pull this quote up.
I do remember that letter.
And he said basically, I don't have any of those esteemed, I don't have any of that esteemed race in my background.
Because they're wonderful.
Because they're wonderful, and you guys are horrible for,
Right.
It was clear he was
that.
getting a dig in. He absolutely despised that anti-Semitism. So, if the dwarves are based, or to the extent that the dwarves are based on the Jews, it's not meant to be a negative thing at all.
Right.
But it's interesting. And I remember reading someplace else. This was interesting. Again, really reach. I would never say that this is the case, but it was interesting to see somebody talk about that the Arkenstone represented the Ark of the Covenant, and that the Lonely Mountain represents Temple Mount.
Oh wow!
That probably is a stretch too far, but it's an interesting thought.
Probably getting a little too allegorical.
Just a little bit, but anyway, it certainly shows that there are folks who certainly see that
some
connection.
Similarities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly feels right. So
definitely
cool. Well, I think that's probably going to bring us to Menegroth, isn't it?
I think so. I'm trying to take a look here. Yeah, definitely. Let's see. So I think I'm going to have you read the paragraph that starts out with "Now Melian had much foresight."
Okay. Now Melian had much foresight, after the manner of the Maiar. And when the second age of the captivity of Melkor had passed, she counseled Thingol that the peace of Arda would not last forever. He took thought, therefore, how he should make for himself a kingly dwelling, and a place that should be strong, if evil were to awake again in Middle-earth. And he sought aid and counsel of the dwarves of Belegost. They gave it willingly, for they were unwearied in those days and eager for new works. And though the dwarves ever demanded a price for all that they did, whether with delight or with toil, at this time they held themselves paid. For Melian taught them much that they were eager to learn, and Thingol rewarded them with many fair pearls. These Círdan gave to him, for they were got in great number in the shallow waters about the Isle of Balar. But the Naugrim had not before seen their like, and they held them dear. One there was as great as a dove's egg, and its sheen was as starlight on the foam of the sea. Nymphalos it was named, and the chieftain of the dwarves of Belagost prized it above a mountain of wealth.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we actually hear of Nymphalos again. I looked I searched my electronic copy, and it only shows up in the index. So.
I don't think we do hear about it again, and I would just throw out there that I don't think it's the Arkenstone.
We have to say that about every
single
roughly
stone
hand-sized
that's in
gem
reference to the dwarves. Again, no. The Arkenstone is faceted, and I don't think
facet a pearl.
I don't think you can facet a pearl.
You cannot facet a pearl. My goodness, that I never even thought about Nymphalos being the Arkenstone, but I guess
I don't know. I feel like I got to get it out there. Just
you do.
We keep on.
Yeah, people always want to think something. Well, maybe that's the Arkenstone.
Right. So where are we on the timeline here? Since you've got the timeline handy?
Well, we are. We're probably pushing around 50 minutes. That timeline.
The timeline in Middle Earth. Sir.
Of course, we are almost 1,000 years after the end of the First Age. We're now after the Second Age, right? So this is when the Second Age of the captivity of Melkor. So this is 1,000 years after the end of the First Age.
Okay.
So Luthien's 1,000 years old, and they're wondering when she's going to get out. She's like the worst millennial in the world. She's 1,000 years old and still hasn't left home.
Move out of the basement.
Get out of the house. Go live on your own. No.
Actually, they're about to make the whole house the basement.
Yes, they are. Well done. I also thought it was interesting. Thingol sought the counsel of the dwarves, and he accepted the counsel of Melian. Feanor, take note.
Hey, how about some counsel?
Counsel's a good thing. Tulkas, you might want to stay out of the conversation since you're no good at counsel.
Yeah. Take some counsel with someone besides yourself, and maybe
and your everybody. Sons who are just your 7 yes men.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I also thought it was really cool to see that the dwarves, who are known for being, at least in most of the book, most of the works, are known for being rather demanding in terms of gold. Mm-hmm. They gave their counsel willingly, they gave their aid willingly, and they considered themselves paid.
Yeah.
Now, Thingol rewarded them with pearls, so they did have some material stuff, but I thought this was interesting, and I just wish I could be a fly on the wall. Melian taught them much that they were eager to learn.
I know.
What could Melian have taught dwarves?
I know. I wonder.
How to braid a lady's beard? Well,
obviously, yes, that, because,
I don't know. I mean, what could Melian have possibly taught the dwarves that they would have found useful?
I now have an image in my head that Melian looks like the dwarven image of female beauty. She's got this flowing beard.
Oh, no.
She's a Maya.
She's a Maya.
She can put herself in whatever raiment she wants.
That's a good point. So she pardons herself from Thingol's presence and says, "Excuse me, while I put on my beard."
Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
But I do wonder, what could she have taught them? You know, were the dwarves possibly interested in anything regarding the history of Valinor?
Could be.
Maybe she might have been able to teach them stuff about Aule.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe she taught them a little bit about Aule. They learned a little bit about their maker that way.
That would be cool. What else really, what would Melian have known that the dwarves would find useful? I love that.
Let's see. Melian had, in Aman, she had hung out in Estes and Lorien's gardens, right?
Right. So that's not really dwarvish in compassion and all of that. Anyway, I just find that fascinating, and I really wish I knew what it was that she taught them.
I know. It's fascinating stuff.
And then going back to the map, let's go take a look at the Lothar Project map. So we've got Doriath there in the middle. We find out that the pearls were gotten in great number in the shallow waters about the Isle of Balar. That is all the way to the southwest in the map. So if you look to the immediate west of Doriath, you see River Sirion running through, splitting the forest of Brethil and Neldoreth. Then it goes through the mountain range, comes out, and goes all the way down to the mouths of Sirion, into the Bay of Balar, and there, to the southwest of the bay, is the Isle of Balar.
Okay. Now, so we know the Philothrim were sailing at least to the Isle of Balar.
Quite a ways, because the Phalos is
way up to the northwest there.
Way up to the northwest, probably a good 300-400 miles, based on what we know later in terms of
good point. Yeah,
Thangorodrim ends up being.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Remember, the Isle of Balar showed up earlier. That's the piece of the island that broke off.
Right.
When Ulmo carried the elves over to Aman.
To Aman on Toleresia. So that's like a little piece of Toleresia that that got left in the bay.
The root of the island stayed there. Yeah. So really that's where the pearls came from. I just thought that was interesting. And then also the description of Menegroth itself in terms of its location. We're going to read this. Let's start with just like one sentence into the next paragraph. So, and I'll stop as I'm reading to kind of point things out. So, where the Escalduin flowed down and parted Neldoreth from Rhegion. So that, you'd have to zoom in on the map, but it's such a great map, you can zoom in so easily. So the Escalduin is the river that runs, at least in Doriath, it runs east-west, but it comes from the north. So it comes north-south to
comes
Menegroth,
down from like the Ered Gorgoroth.
Ered Gorgoroth comes down into the forest, and then makes that I guess right-hand turn as it's coming. It makes a turn to the west at Menegroth and goes to Sirion. Yeah. So where the Escalduin flowed down and parted Neldoreth from Rhegion. So now you've got two forests. You've got the forest of Rhegion, which is to the south and east, and the forest of Neldoreth, which is in the northwest there. So where that river happened, there rose in the midst of the forest a rocky hill, and the river ran at its feet. There they made the gates of the hall of Thingol, and they built a bridge of stone over the river, by which alone the gates could be entered. Beyond the gates, wide passages ran down to high halls and chambers far below that were hewn in the living stone, so many and so great that the dwelling was named Menegroth, the 1,000 Caves. But the elves also had part in that labor, and elves and dwarves together, each with their own skill, there wrought out the visions of Melian, images of the wonder and beauty of Valinor beyond the sea. The pillars of Menegroth were hewn in the likeness of the beeches of Orome, stalk, bow, and leaf, and they were lit with lanterns of gold. Stalk, bough, and leaf. I can't read tonight. And they were lit with lanterns of gold. The nightingales, keep in mind, that's what Luthien Tenuviel, we know that nightingales are associated with, with her mom, with Melian. Mm-hmm. So the nightingales sang there as in the gardens of Lorien, and there were fountains of silver, and basins of marble, and floors of many-colored stone. Carven figures of beasts and birds there ran upon the walls, or climbed upon the pillars, or peered among the branches entwined with many flowers. And as the years passed, Melian and her maidens filled the halls with woven hangings, wherein could be read the deeds of the Valar, and many things that had befallen in Arda since its beginning, and shadows of things that were yet to be. That was the fairest dwelling of any king that has ever been east of the sea.
Wow.
What a place.
It certainly sounds like the fairest dwelling.
Posters on the wall that predict the future.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. That's amazing.
No, truly just beautiful. I mean,
it really
the idea
is.
Of these, just the pillars hewn to look like trees.
It really is like a mini Valinor, like just the
underground
beauty of
Valinor.
It all. Yeah,
nightingales, silver fountains, marble basins.
Oh yeah,
so much detail, and I love that the entire history of the Valar was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that this is actually defined, the fairest dwelling of any king that has ever been east of the sea.
Yeah,
there's no. This is
fairer
than
that's fairer than Gondolin.
Yeah.
Fairer than anything to come later.
Right. Rivendell.
Right.
Lothlorien.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Certainly fairer than any of the Manish kingdoms, Minas Tirith, or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Any of the capitals. Wow, it's just beautiful.
I can't even imagine.
And unsurprisingly, it was made by harmony between races, wasn't it?
That's exactly the point. Elves and dwarves together. Well, and even
and with the foresight of Melian. So yeah, it's a harmony between elf and dwarf and Maya,
which really never happened again.
True.
But wow, yeah, absolutely. Once again, teamwork does it. Generosity, seeking of counsel. It is. This is all go team. Great stuff. But it doesn't last. I mean, it does last, but we find some disturbing news shortly thereafter, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So we'll start with a timeline check, won't we? This is now going just past this. First we get that little bit just to remind us that the dwarves went seldom to the Falas, for they hated the sound of the sea.
Yes.
We kind of touched on this, didn't we? Is this the fact that because they loved Aule and not Ulmo?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those long-term effects of Aule hiding his work of making the dwarves from the other Valar, that they only love his domain. They only love stone.
Yeah.
So they don't love Ulmo's domain. We
don't love Yavanna's domain.
We know they don't love Yavanna's domain. Yeah, I think that's what this has.
That's a good point.
Has a lot to do with
the consequences of Aule's action. You're right. It's an excellent point. So they, it wasn't that they didn't go to the Falas because it was just too far out of the way. They didn't go there because they hated the sound of the sea.
No interest in going to the sea. Yep.
So they liked water about as much as Sam did, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's see. So we get the arrival of evil. The next paragraph tells us that the third age of the captivity of Melkor drew on. So now we're getting, up to, 40, not quite to 4,900. So Luthien's getting really old to be living at home, but, she's still there.
Still on her parents' insurance and everything.
I'm not going anywhere with that. I'm just going to leave that alone. The dwarves tell them that there are fell beasts in the land east of the mountains, and your ancient kindred that dwell there are flying from the plains to the hills.
Yeah.
By the way, flying here is metaphorical. It means they're running. I just want to point that out, that not every time wings or flying are mentioned does it actually mean things have wings or are flying.
Balrogs.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, read Tom's essay. You'll get it. You'll understand, and you'll finally
totally get it.
I think you'll finally agree.
I think it's interesting that it's the dwarves who hear about this, because of course the dwarves are to the east.
Well, and they're traders. They clearly.
Oh, that's a good point.
They're connected. That's they're the grease of this economy. So I'm sure that probably had something to do with it, and they were able to get that message. The grease, amongst the wheels.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you meant like the lubricant or like the ancient culture. Like,
oh, well, yeah, I guess it could have been that too. I was thinking of the lubricant, but it's gotten to the point where I have to spell now. I have to spell my words just to make sure you get context.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, grease, as in grease is the word.
Oh man, that's awesome. I love that. Well done.
Oh man, it's late.
Yeah.
So, fell beasts. Now, these are not the same fell beasts that we see later on. It's a fell beast. It's a beast that's a cruel beast, right?
Right. Fell as in cruel or terrible, as in like one fell swoop.
Yeah. It's just a generic adjective. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up because anybody who's familiar with the movies might know that they actually sold action figures of the Nazgul steeds under the name Fell Beast. And it kind of makes you
probably because nobody at the company could spell Dwimmer Lake.
Could be. Could be.
Foul Dwimmer Lake just didn't
Foul
pass
Dwimmer
the
Lake.
Focus groups.
No.
Fell Beast did.
Fell Beast worked. But yeah, it's worth pointing out that Tolkien, that isn't a fell beast, capital F, capital B. Tolkien uses this term fell beasts a lot of times throughout the Legendarium. He uses it actually of werewolves later on.
That's true in Beren and Luthien.
Beren and Luthien, yeah.
That's a good point.
So I'm glad you brought that up because it's one of my little pet peeves is referring to the Nazgul steeds. The fell beasts.
Well, and when we talk about fell beasts being werewolves, I just want to kind of leave a little hint that we'd see on this. It says wolves there were, or creatures that walked in wolf shape. Mm-hmm. We'll talk more about that later. I'm just going to kind of leave that there because we're going to get to a point where we're talking about a very mighty werewolf and also a very mighty wolf.
Oh yeah,
Sauron and Karkaroth. Mm-hmm. But that story is later, and I think at that point we'll start talking about what's the difference between a wolf and a warg and a werewolf, and which ones have like Maiar-like spirits, and what
that's going to be fun. Yeah,
it's a really interesting conversation to be had. I think there was a thread on that in one of the groups I was in. I don't know, about a year ago, and it just went on and on and on. It was a really fun one.
That's cool.
As opposed to all the threads that constantly talk about the Silmarillion movies. I just want to stop. I want them all to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like there's like one new one every 3 days.
Every other day, yeah. Oh, I hope they make a movie of that. Are you climbing out from the cave you've been in? Because everybody's been posting this over and over again. Anyway, like we said, they shouldn't, but I'd still be the first to line up.
Totally. Yeah, no,
yeah.
I'll talk smack about it all day long.
I'll stand in the movie line for 8 hours saying
production
they shouldn't do this. I shouldn't be watching this movie. It's going to be horrible. They can't do it justice. And then I'd be the first one to watch
I will be there at a midnight screening on opening night.
Absolutely.
Just to hear Morgan Freeman come out as Iluvatar.
No. Though I guess that's better than like Mike Myers.
Yeah. Just imagine Morgan Freeman coming out.
No, I don't want to imagine any voice. I don't.
I will now that you make before me a great music.
Oh, man.
All right, let's go back to the text.
I will now that ye make a great music.
Oh, my God, you did the Ungoliant voice.
You asked me to pull it when you didn't expect it.
Thank you. Oh, you made my day. Thank you, Alan.
You are welcome. Let's just hope you're not the only one whose day I made. That was good stuff.
Starring Ungoliant as Iluvatar.
in her understudy role.
In a surprise casting choice.
I only resorted to that because I just can't do Morgan Freeman.
Oh, there you go. Well, yeah.
And the voices I can do, I couldn't think of any others that would work. Mr. Burns as Iluvatar. I will now that you make a great music.
Excellent.
It's an excellent music. Release the hounds. Anyway, this is going to go really far afield.
Yes. Let's go back to the Silmarillion.
You've got a note here that I just want you to explain. The compass points of doom?
Oh, yeah, the compass points of doom. It's just an interesting little tidbit. We hear about where is this? That the problems coming in from the east.
Right. Well, first they hadn't rooted out utterly the evils of the north.
And
the land east of the mountains are the fell beasts.
Thank you for finding it. Yeah, I'm still got Morgan Freeman in my mind.
Get out, Morgan. Get out. You don't belong there.
Just a neat little thing in Tolkien's work. East is always bad, and north is almost always bad.
Interesting. You're right. Well, and even in Lord of the Rings, even south becomes kind of bad, doesn't it? It's pretty much just
true.
the west.
Yeah, when you get the Haradrim and everything coming from the south. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. But I always think of it's the funeral dirge that Aragorn and Legolas sing for Boromir.
One of my favorite musical moments.
It is a great moment in it's Two Towers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and they sing a verse about the north wind, they sing a verse about the south wind, they sing a verse about the west wind, and then I think it's Gimli who says, "Well, you left the east wind to me, but I don't have the heart to sing anything."
Yeah, speak not of the east wind.
Right. Aragorn says, no, we don't want to speak about the east wind. Yeah, nothing good ever comes from the east. East is always the direction of sort of darkness, I would say, and evil. And you're right. By the Third Age, certainly north and south. Well, here north is too, because they're so far north that there's nothing north of them except frozen wastes.
Exactly, just the frontier. That's true.
Right. But then later on,
we don't get north. Once we're further south in the story, like say Gondor, the north isn't a bad thing anymore. Now it's the south.
Right.
Interesting. Very interesting. But certainly the east is always bad. You're right.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are, north is bad or south is bad.
Yeah. And west is always good. West is always the direction of enlightenment.
Well,
obviously, because Aman's there.
That's where Aman is. That's where Teleri is. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's see. I took a little bit of that line there about the wolves, but I wanted you to read that paragraph because there's a couple things in there I wanted to talk about. And ere long, the evil creatures. That one. I think.
Is that one mine? Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. And ere long, the evil creatures came even to Beleriand, over passes in the mountains, or up from the south through the dark forests. Wolves there were, or creatures that walked in wolf shapes, and other fell beings of shadow. And among them were the Orcs, who afterwards wrought ruin in Beleriand, but they were yet few and wary, and did but smell out the ways of the land, awaiting the return of their lord. Whence they came, or what they were, the elves knew not then, thinking them perhaps to be Avari, who had become evil and savage in the wild, in which they guessed all too near, it is said.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to. Boy, that, what we learned about with the Avari being captured way back, when they first awoke by Lake Cuivienen, and the hunter would come, and get them, and that's why they were afraid of Orome, because they thought it was him, and we know that in one of the most horrible things that Melkor could have done, he took them and twisted them into the Orcs.
To the Orcs, yeah.
Just one of the most evil things that's been done in the entire story so far.
It's interesting to think that they could actually just guess it. They could sense it.
Yeah.
I mean, probably you could sense that this is a twisted, bred, creature bred from something like you. You would feel that that
similarity.
Revulsion. That similarity, but also that revulsion. Yeah.
Ooh.
It's chilling.
Sort of like the Reavers.
Oh,
Firefly.
Yeah, from Firefly. Yeah.
See, I had to get all those cool references in.
Yeah. You're always there with the good references. I love that.
Man, boy, the Firefly was like one of my favorite shows ever.
Oh, it was an awesome show.
Yeah. I realized
who doesn't love that show?
Seriously, if you've not watched,
I'm sure we're going to get mail from somebody who doesn't love it. But come on,
that's
everybody
okay. Yeah, it really. I mean, how do you?
There's only 14 episodes. You can watch them all in like a weekend.
Pretty much. Yeah. You should be able to watch an entire all of the entire story
series
one weekend, and the movie.
Yeah.
I realize now that I think I had us reading opposite passages, but I'll just take the next one that I had marked as yours. But I really like that passage needed to be read. That was really chilling. The whole idea that they were able to kind of, like you said, recognize and be revulsed by that similarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we wanted to talk a little bit about what happens next. So Thingol decides he needs to get himself some weapons.
Some weapons, yeah.
So he talks to the Naugrim, and they make him some. And why are they good at that? Well, a warlike race of old were all the Naugrim, and they would fight fiercely against whomsoever aggrieved them. And they're looking for a fight anywhere they can find one. Servants of Melkor, or Eldar, or Avari, or wild beasts, or not seldom their own kin, dwarves of other mansions and lordships. Their smithcraft, indeed, the Sindar soon learned of them. Yet, in the tempering of steel alone, of all crafts, the dwarves were never outmatched even by the Noldor. And in the making of mail of linked rings, which was first contrived by the smiths of Belegost, their work had no rival.
Wow.
So
even the Noldor,
the Noldor
weren't the steelsmiths that they were. That's amazing.
It really is. But I noticed you pointed out something else too. Right before that, I saw something about Telkar.
Telkar the Smith, yeah.
I'd forgotten about this.
Do you remember? Anybody remember this name? It's actually mentioned in Lord of the Rings. There's a passage. This is Book 3, Chapter 6, I believe. Aragorn says, "In this elvish sheath dwells the blade that was broken and has been made again. Telkar first wrought it in the deeps of time. Death shall come to any man that draws Elendil's sword, save Elendil's heir."
That's so cool.
So that's obviously, Narsil
Telkar.
and Duriel,
Right.
Was wrought by Telkar. Yeah. Wow. So it is Aragorn's sword is this old. It was made now.
Yeah, it pretty much would have to have been, because the dwarves are not immortal. I mean, but they can live several hundred years. So Telkar could.
It could have been, yeah, sure, but certainly in this.
Actually, I just realized, looking at the text, that doesn't necessarily follow. Listen to this. It just says that none among them surpassed the craftsmen of Nogrod, of whom Telkar the smith was greatest in renown. So that could have come down. In other words, you don't know any of the Nogrod? Oh, you know about the Nogrod because Telkar was one of them.
That's a good point. Maybe he wasn't. We'll have to look that up and see if Telkar actually was in the first stage or later. That's a good point. But it would have had.
Actually, I guess it would have had to have been before the drowning of Beleriand. Certainly. Because I don't
because Nogrod I think is still around by the third age, because the Ered Luin is still there.
Yeah, because the east side of the Ered Luin is still. Yeah, you're right. Interesting. I don't know. We'll have to find a timeline on Telkar, but
we'll have to look that up.
I don't think the text is conclusive to say that Telkar lived at that time.
But probably it's. I gotta think it was some point in the first age, because
Yeah.
Again, remember that Aragorn has Sindarin heritage
True.
through Luthien.
Through Luthien, yeah.
And it seems unlikely that Númenóreans would have gotten a hold of a blade from Telkar through another means.
That's true. I think you're probably
So
right.
probably sometime in the First Age, but maybe not just yet.
Yeah. Well, it won't be much later that they'd be, I mean, there's going to come a time where the dwarves aren't going to be crafting anything for the descendants of Luthien.
No, not at all.
So you're right.
Exactly.
So
it's
it'd have
not
to
gonna
come
be
up
after that.
sometime soon, or it wouldn't happen at all. You're right. Interesting. We'll have to kind of hash some of that out.
Yeah.
Well, now, why do we bring all this up? I think it's interesting. We look at the struggles of the Sindar. These are very real. They're very grounded, kind of down to earth, understandable struggles. These are struggles for survival. They're fighting monsters. They're fighting orcs, werewolves. The Noldor are fighting each other, and the Teleri.
Yes.
And this isn't.
They're fighting for pride. The
Yeah,
Noldor are
that's
fighting
exactly
for,
right. The Sindar are fighting for their lives.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and I know you did too, because this is all happening at the same time.
Right.
Well, not quite yet, because Melkor's still not unchained.
Oh, that's true.
So
Melkor's not unchained yet.
Yeah, the Noldor aren't quite at each other's necks yet.
Yeah.
But they will be soon enough. Anyway, it's interesting.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. So we get, we get the arrival of the Nandor.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and read this paragraph. It looks like I've got little is known. So there's a break here, and then now as has been told, the next sentence to the end of the paragraph. Little is known of the wanderings of the Nandor, whom he led, he being Lenwë of the host of Olwë, led away down Anduin. Some, it is said, dwelt age long in the woods of the vale of the great river. That would be Anduin. Some came at last to its mouths, and there dwelt by the sea. And yet others, passing by Ered Nimrais, the White Mountains, came north again, and entered the wilderness of Eriador between Ered Luin and the far mountains of mist. Now these were a woodland people, and had no weapons of steel. Maybe they were armed with slender bows, I don't know.
Probably.
And the coming of the fell beasts of the north filled them with great fear, as the Naugrim declared to King Thingol and Menegroth. Therefore Denethor, the son of Lenwë, hearing rumor of the might of Thingol and his majesty, and of the peace of his realm, gathered such host of his scattered people as he could, and led them over the mountains into Beleriand. There they were welcomed by Thingol, as kin long lost that return, and they dwelt in Osiriand, the land of 7 rivers. So geography, a lot of this is actually off the map, but most of you can recall the Anduin from
Lord of the Rings,
from Lord of the Rings map. So the Vale of the Great River, they would have eventually gotten to its mouths. That would be down by Lasarnach in South Gondor.
Right.
And then eventually they passed by the White Mountains. Those would be the ones that run east-west north of Gondor, that separate Gondor and Rohan, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know if they separate them. They run sort of along the path between them.
Yeah, that's true.
Because Edoras is on like a northern spur of the Ered Nimrais, and then Mindalluin, which is where Minas Tirith is the eastern edge.
Yeah, but Gondor is to the south of the Ered Nimrais.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true. Minas Tirith is right there. But you're right. Yeah, the mountains, I guess, would technically be a separation, wouldn't they?
For the most part, but yeah. So they would pass over those and then come over into Eriador between Ered Luin and the Misty Mountains. So that would be, that would be in those wide lands like Eregion and Enidwaith and Dunland and all that area.
Right.
So they were a woodland people, so they didn't have, a lot of weapons. These weren't, city dwellers with, smiths and all of that.
No, didn't forge weapons or anything like that.
No, they were very, hippie-like, living with the trees.
And you're probably right. They probably would have used bows or something that they could have hunted with.
Yeah. So they obviously were mismatched with the fell beasts. So they come over the mountains. So now we can look at our map. They came over the Ered Luin and would have spoken to Thingol, and he gave them the land of Osiriand. That's in the far southeast of the map. It's where all those tributaries to the Gelion are that come out from the southern half of the Ered Luin.
And that means the land of 7 rivers, and you can clearly see the 7 rivers right there on the map. There's the Gelion and then the 6 tributaries off to it.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you're looking for 7 tributaries, you're not going to find them.
Right. The 7th would be the Gelion.
So let's see. Denethor. This is no relation?
No relation.
Oh, man. Yeah. This is a very different guy.
Unconveniently reusing names, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we get, he uses renames, human names a lot. People are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Many, many times the second or the third example of these names. So these were the Lyquendi.
The Lyquendi, the Green Elves.
Yes. They're, let's see, so where they fit in the scheme of elves, they were not of the Avari, they were of the Eldar.
Right, because they started on the march.
But they left
They left early.
Yeah.
They left basically at the Anduin. That's where they stopped.
You're right. Yeah, before they got to the Misty Mountains, before they crossed the Anduin. So they ended the journey much, much earlier than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Now these are related to most of the peoples of Mirkwood and Lothlorien.
Yeah.
So Mirkwood and Lothlorien, although they're ruled by Sindarin elves, Thranduil and Celeborn, I guess, because Galadriel's Noldo, but
right.
But they're ruled by I guess high elves. But most of the people of Mirkwood and Lothlorien would have been Nandor. But the Green Elves, the Lyquendi, are other Nandor who left their cousins probably in those places.
True. Okay, well, we've got that. And then you got a little bit of word nerd good stuff coming up.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you read that passage first, then we can talk about it.
Okay. So this is in the next paragraph, the second sentence. In those days, it is said, Dairon the minstrel, chief lore master of the kingdom of Thingol, devised his runes, and the Naugrim that came to Thingol learned them, and were well pleased with the device, esteeming Dairon's skill higher than did the Sindar, his own people. By the Naugrim, the Cirth were taken east over the mountains, and passed into the knowledge of many peoples. But they were little used by the Sindar for the keeping of records, until the days of the war, and much that was held in memory perished in the ruins of Doriath. But of bliss and glad life there is little to be said before it ends, as works fair and wonderful, while still they endure for eyes to see, are their own record, and only when they are in peril, or broken forever, do they pass into song.
Wow.
Ooh.
Just wow.
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment at the end. I mainly wanted that passage for the Cirth stuff, which I'll get into, but I just love that passage at the end. I mean, it's wow.
It's so true. It is absolutely true. Even now, here we are, we've got young families, our kids are growing. There's only when things are different, only when things are in peril do you start to look at what is, you start to value your past and your history. I don't take enough pictures. I don't take enough video. I don't write enough things down. And it's because, it's because I'm busy, but it's because, it's because we're in bliss and glad life. And so we just kind of don't think about that
You're
stuff.
just enjoying it and you don't think about, stopping to remember
Recording it for posterity. Right.
Yeah.
But, you can see the beauty still around you, so you don't really think about what to say. And then they only get into song or, history when they're in danger of being destroyed or when they're actually destroyed.
Yeah.
And that's a sad thing. That's a real unfortunate thing.
Yeah.
But we can't really spend much time there other than just to say that. And I know you've got some stuff to say about the Cirth.
Yeah, I just want to spend a little time on the Cirth just because they are one of the scripts that you see a lot in Lord of the Rings. If you remember the Balin's tomb from Moria, that's got the runes on it, and those are actually the Cirth. In fact, Gandalf says in that part, "These are the runes of Dairon," or "These are Dairon's runes," something like that. So we get here that they were devised by Dairon. They were devised by a Sindarin elf, which means that they're not related to the scripts that we talked about in earlier chapters, which are the Sarati of Rumil or the Tengwar of Feanor. So they're developed completely independently.
Right.
Interestingly, they do have some features in common with the Tengwar, one of which I'm going to go really word nerd on you here, and say they're featural scripts. So a featural script is one where the shape of the letter tells you something about how it's pronounced. So let's take
Okay, yeah.
let's take for example let's look at the Kirth since we're talking about those. If you look at the Kirth for P, it kind of looks like a P. It looks like an angular P. It's just a straight line with a a little triangle off to the side of it. If you add a stroke, then that changes the P sound into a B sound. That's called adding voice in linguistics. Or if you reverse the P, that changes the P sound to an F sound, which is called making it a spirant or a fricative. And so it's just that's true of all or most of the consonants here.
Tulka smash.
Am I losing you a little bit? It's all in Appendix E, actually.
Okay. Wow.
But really, it's just the shape of the letter defines the sound, which is different.
That's pretty cool. It's
different from our alphabet, where there's no relationship between the shape of a shape of a P and the shape of an R. They just kind of look similar, but there's no common sound there.
None at all.
But Kirith actually, the way they look actually helps define how they sound, and Tengwar are the same.
Yeah.
So it's just neat because they're very logical scripts. They're intentionally designed to be easy to read. So maybe
to decipher. Yeah, you're right.
Maybe they're not always to some people, but I found them easy to learn when I learned them, just because they were so logical.
That makes sense.
And as a letter nerd, that's kind of cool to me.
That is very cool. Well, I find it interesting that the dwarves like them more than the elves did, and I'm almost thinking that's aesthetic. That
could be.
They just are very they're all straight lines, and it's not elvish. It's not it's beautiful. It's kind of like the dwarvish language. I mean, it's
but something you could carve into metal.
Well, and that's the thing, really, and that's why you can't carve or chisel into stone.
Chisel into stone.
You couldn't chisel the Tengwar into stone.
Yeah, these beautiful rounded bows.
Well, I mean, I guess you could, but it would take forever.
It would take a very long time.
Yeah. What have you been doing the last 3 years? Well, I'm writing a letter, and I'm at hello.
Dwarves don't have time for that. They got people to fight,
weapons to make, and
yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I just thought that was interesting. That it does seem to be some sort of an aesthetic reason why the elves really don't prefer it, but the dwarves certainly do.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, it made me think of the runes on the map in The Hobbit, but I don't think those are Kirith, are they?
No, they are not, actually.
Okay, I wasn't sure because I remember trying to take the appendix and
trying to
translate
decipher them,
and it didn't work. It was like saying about bi-Ovaltine or something.
No, yep, that's wow.
Sorry.
Well, you got some interesting secret messages there. Yeah, those are not the Kirith.
No.
Actually, an interesting question. Those are based on actual Anglo-Saxon runes, which are called the Futhorc.
The Futhorc, okay.
Futhorc, which is just the names of the first 6 letters. Or it's just it's like an acronym from the first 6 letters. Of the alphabet. I think the reason Tolkien used the Anglo-Saxon runes for Thror's map is probably first of all because he wasn't quite sure the Hobbit was going to fit into his legendarium just yet.
No.
But also, remember we talked about the dwarves not sharing their language with others, and the fact that Thror's people were in diaspora, and so. Their language that they use, they use their Westron language. Their names were all in the Westron language. And so Tolkien always
Mannish language.
Right, which is the Mannish language, the language that was spoken by people around them. And Tolkien always rendered Westron as English. So I think that's why he used actual English runes for that.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a whole appendix on runes in, I think it's in volume 7 of History of Middle-earth.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody's
Treason of Isengard.
There's an appendix on runes, and it's got some of Tolkien's drawings of different runes. But anyway, probably nobody's interested in that stuff as much as me.
I bet that's not true.
There's probably a few out there.
I bet there are a few. But now we get to the noontide of Beleriand. I'm going to go ahead and read this next paragraph, and then we'll talk about what's going on here. And we'll have to step it up. I just realized we're actually moving along pretty quickly here. I mean, not moving along pretty quickly. We probably need to move on a little quickly.
Yeah.
So in Beleriand in those days, the elves walked, and the rivers flowed, and the stars shone, and the night flowers gave forth their scents. And the beauty of Melian was as the noon, and the beauty of Luthien was as the dawn in spring. In Beleriand, King Thingol upon his throne was as the lords of the Maiar, whose power is at rest, whose joy is as an air that they breathe in all their days, whose thought flows in a tide untroubled from the heights to the deeps. In Beleriand still, at times, rode Orome the Great, passing like a wind over the mountains, and the sound of his horn came down the leagues of the starlight, and the elves feared him for the splendor of his countenance, and the great noise of the onrush of Nahar. But when the Valaroma echoed in the hills, they knew well that all evil things were fled away.
Good old Orome.
Love that prose. That whole paragraph is just beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I loved the stars shone, the night flowers. I love that we get this interesting time, right? We get night flowers. Beauty of Melian is as noon. And the beauty of Luthien is as dawn and spring.
Right.
So dawn, noon, and night.
And you know what that makes me think of? This beauty of Luthien as the dawn and spring. That makes me think of the appendix in Return of the King that talks about Arwen's death, where she's described as being like nightfall in winter that comes without a star.
Oh, beautiful.
Isn't that cool? It's like, and really, remember, Arwen is the tail end of this, of this line that rose with Luthien.
She's the very end of,
she's the very, I mean,
her
she's
son.
the last elf. Yeah.
She's Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And then, hey, you're here. The writing of Orome.
Yeah. I was out there hunting bad guys the whole time.
Tulkas is busy lifting. I don't know what he's doing. He's just doing some push-ups or something. But Orome's out here, doing the work.
Yeah.
I love that.
And the elves fear him, but I love the fact that they knew well that all evil things were fled far away. They know he's taking care of business.
Yeah, he's getting the job done.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, so sorry. My goodness.
It is getting late.
It is. Well, let's take a look real quick here at a timeline check. We get the very next paragraph, which I'll also cover because it gives us some good geography and gives us a transition from this bliss to the end of bliss. And we'll talk about timelines. So it came to pass at last that the end of bliss was at hand, and the noontide of Valinor was drawing to its twilight. Or as we've been saying, tick-tock, tick-tock.
Yep.
For as has been told, and as is known to all, being written in lore and sung in many songs, Melkor slew the trees of the Valar with the aid of Ungoliant, and escaped and came back to Middle-earth. Far to the north befell the strife of Morgoth and Ungoliant, but the great cry of Morgoth echoed through Beleriand, and all its people shrank for fear, for they knew not what it foreboded. They heard then the herald of death. Soon afterwards Ungoliant fled from the north, and came into the realm of King Thingol, and a terror of darkness was about her. But by the power of Melian she was stayed, and entered not into Neldereth, but abode long time under the shadow of the precipices in which Dorthonion fell southward. And they became known as Ered Gorgoroth, the mountains of terror, and none dared go thither or pass nigh them. There life and light were strangled, and there all waters were poisoned. But Morgoth, as has before been told, returned to Angband and built it anew, and above its doors he reared the reeking towers of Thangorodrim, and the gates of Morgoth were but 150 leagues distant from the bridge of Menegroth, far, and yet all too near.
Wow.
There's a lot there.
Nice little recap of some of the things we've seen in recent.
Yeah, and it ties the two timelines together now.
Yeah,
now we're getting an understanding. And it's interesting, if we look back at the map, which we're going to do here, where was it that Morgoth came ashore? The Lamoth. That on your map is all the way in the northwest.
Yeah.
So look to the west of Doriath and then go north, and you can see the Lamoth up there above Neverast, to the west of Hithlum and the west of Dorloman.
So somewhere up there, off the screen, would be the Helcaraxe and all that stuff that
up
they came
even
down
further
through.
off the northwest. So he gets ashore on Lamoth, and that's where that fight took place with Ungoliant, and his scream echoed through Beleriand. That is massive.
From that space, that's a huge screen. Yeah.
His scream could be heard all the way through Beleriand. So
amazing.
Hundreds of miles, as we'll get to when we talk a little bit about scale in a bit.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Uh-huh.
So she gets into the land of Ered Gorgoroth there, just north of the forest of Neldoreth is Nen Dungortheb, which is the valley between Ered Gorgoroth and the forest, and that's the place you don't want to be.
Right.
Talk
about a place that sounds like what Ered Gorgoroth. I mean, that's just a ugly, scary word.
It really is, the Gorgoroth.
The mountains of terror, Ered Gorgoroth.
Well, yeah. I mean, what other words do we have that sound like that? We have a few. I'm trying to think of others that have that GOR, that sort of mountains of terror.
Isn't there a Kirith Gorgor somewhere in Mordor?
I think there is.
Like the passive terror.
The passive, yeah. I think so. I know that there's other stuff. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. Here's a little line that I like, I don't like, but it's an interesting line. Their life and light were strangled. Well, of course they were. That's what Ungoliant does.
That's what Ungoliant does, yeah.
She sucks up light. She eats the light. So it was a horribly dark place. So now we can combine the two timelines and say, oh, this happened at X. So Morgoth's Cry in the Lamoth was 95 Valinorian years after his release, which is about 930 years after he'd been freed. So at this point, Luthien is a little over 2,900 years old. So when we said this is a long chapter, it's a 3,000-year long chapter.
There you go.
But that gives us a timeline, and now we can combine the two. And we're about to see that happen even more with the next chapter. And after that, of course, they're all merged anyway. So, yeah, just amazing stuff. We wanted to talk a little bit about distance.
Because we see that Thangorodrim is 150 leagues from Menegroth.
Yeah. Now, that's not on your map here. It's going to be north of Anfauglith.
Right.
It's going to be just off your map, really, not too far off your map. But 150 leagues. Now, you might get the question, well, what is a league? A league is approximately 3 miles.
Right.
So when we hear about 150 leagues, you're talking about 450 miles.
450 miles. So it's not next door.
No, and you've got a mountain, well, not a mountain range. You've got basically a mountain range and a plain or a plateau, and then another mountain range between you.
And
unless they go through the pass to the west over Syrian, or if they come through eventually around the east through what would eventually become known as the March of Mithros in a couple chapters. So,
I mean, this is a distance that one could drive or take a train in a day, but they didn't have cars.
No.
So,
for those of us not using the imperial system, that's a little over 700 kilometers.
Oh, thank you.
So, not that
Good catch.
I would never. If you told me 700 kilometers, I would say I can walk that tomorrow. I don't know how long that is. Or maybe it takes me a week to drive. I don't know. I have no idea.
We have no idea.
700 kilometers. Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
I did some Google Maps on this distance.
I was about to ask about that.
And I came up with a few actually. Not sure we have time for all of them here, but my favorite one that I came up with was for our UK listeners and for Tolkien, which I think is probably most telling. 460 miles, I think, is the distance from Brighton, which is on the southern coast of England, to Edinburgh, which is in southern Scotland, so just right over the border into Scotland. So Morgoth is about an England away from Menegroth.
Okay, that gives me a pretty good scale.
About the distance of England,
which is not huge. It's a lot closer than I'd want to be.
No, it's not huge. It's about maybe like a 5 or 6 hour train trip, something like that.
Yeah,
I think. It's not that far.
No,
but it's also not next door either.
No. But anyway, interesting stuff. Let's see. So we've talked about Melian's power, interestingly, because she hasn't exercised it all yet, but she was able to keep Ungoliant out, which is good. We'll see, that How long lasting that is, we'll see. But then we get to the first battle of the Wars of Beleriand. We're going to try to power through this fairly quickly, but Sean, I want you to read that. Now the orcs that multiplied in the Wars of Beleriand.
Yep. Now the orcs that multiplied in the darkness of the earth grew strong and fell, and their dark lord filled them with a lust of ruin and death.
There's his spirit being spent.
There's his spirit being spent. There you go. And they issued from Angban's gates under the clouds that Morgoth sent forth, and passed silently into the highlands of the north. Thence on a sudden a great army came into Beleriand, and assailed King Thingol. Now in his wide realm many elves wandered free in the wild, or dwelt at peace in small kindreds far sundered, and only about Menegroth in the midst of the land, and along the Falas in the country of the mariners, were there numerous peoples. But the orcs came down upon either side of Menegroth, and from camps in the east between Caelan and Gelion, and west in the plains between Sirion and Narog. They plundered far and wide, and Thingol was cut off from Círdan at Eglarest. Therefore he called upon Denethor, and the elves came in force from Rhegion beyond Aros and from Osiriand, and fought the first battle in the Wars of Beleriand.
My goodness. Well, so you're going to have to look at the map for that and see.
Yep.
Indeed, they did do what we just talked about. They came, in a pincher move from...
Just swept around Doriath on both sides, didn't they?
Yeah. I had to really kind of figure out what they meant by the plains between Sirion and Narog, but if you're looking at the map, that's to the west of Doriath. You see Aman, and then you see an area called the Talath Dirnan. That looks like that would be what he's referencing there.
I think so, yeah.
Somewhere south of Dorloman, but west of Doriath. So they come from there, which means, of course, they must have come through the pass of the Sirion.
Right.
I guess they could have come through Dorloman. I don't know. It seems a little too many mountain ranges to go through from Thangor.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
And then they would have come around through that area where the Kelon and the Gelion stem from, up in the mountains in the northeast and Himmer.
The northeast. Yep.
So so there's that, and then they get victory. Just to sum up, they get victory, but it was dear bought. The elves of Osiriand were absolutely no match for the orcs. The orcs have iron, iron armor, iron shielded, have big spears.
Yeah.
And of course, the elves of Osiriand, as we know, were armed with
lightly armed.
I mean, again, we might just say slender bows. And compare them to the Teleri in that regard.
Yeah, it's a slaughter.
It had a total slaughter. Denethor cut off. He fell. Most of his kin, but Thingol does come to his aid and avenges the death. But they took no king ever again. The elves of Osiriand really took this deeply, took this loss really hard, and so they actually kind of became this these stealth specialists. They they didn't come out in open war anymore. They were hiding, and they kept themselves by wariness and secrecy.
Kind of feels to me like the first Rangers.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I know we think of Rangers as being Numenorians, but maybe like the sort of the first Elven. If you think of like a D&D Ranger or something like that,
right? The classic archetype, yeah.
Yeah,
because I would always roll a half elven ranger, but me too.
Of course. Rangers. What else are you going to do? A half elven ranger?
No, you kidding me? I was always a paladin. I'm always a paladin. I always had to play lawful good.
Halfling thief.
Of course. You chaotic little creature.
It's Bilbo, man. Come on. What?
It's Bilbo.
I was more a grocer than a burglar.
Oh man. So they ended up merging with Thingol. So they became part of the Sindar at this point. Mm-hmm. I did think it was interesting to see elves working together again.
Yeah.
You've got all these different groups of elves, working together. Whereas on the other side, in Aman, you've got the real elves of Orange County. being all
dramatic.
Seriously, drama queens over here. So I just...
You'll never believe what Fingolfin said about Finarfin.
Seriously.
Yeah, exactly. It's so nice to see elves working together, fighting together.
Right.
Instead of fighting amongst themselves.
And getting slaughtered together. Let's see. I'll try to just get a little bit of this last bit, next to last paragraph. And when Thingol came again to Menegroth, he learned that the orc host in the west was victorious. So this is over by the Falas, and had driven Círdan to the rim of the sea. I'm just going to sum up the rest. He withdrew his people to the fastness of Neldereth and Region. And Melian put forth her power. Here we go. This is the creation of the girdle. Very important. She fenced all that dominion round. So if you zoom in, forest of Neldereth, and the forest of Region. So those are the two portions there right about where it says Doriath and right where Menegroth is. So this does not include the forest of Brethil. It doesn't include any of the areas outside the river Aros, the river Mindeb. It doesn't include Nan Elmoth over to the east. It's just that one little circle right there.
Okay.
So that none thereafter could pass against her will or the will of King Thingol, unless, and this is important, one should come with a power greater than that of Melian the Maya. And this inner land, which was long named Eglador, was after called Doriath, the guarded kingdom, the land of the girdle.
There we go.
Within it there was yet a watchful peace, but without there was peril and great fear. And the servants of Morgoth roamed at will, save in the walled havens of the Falas. So this, they won, but then they had to retreat. It was a very Pyrrhic victory.
Oh, yeah,
to borrow another Greek thing.
They survived, basically. They won. They fought back the Orcs, but they're now they're
really
not
surrounded.
They're not quite under siege, but it's close. They're surrounded. They're on the defense.
They really are. They're definitely playing defense at this point. Sort of a prototype Lothlorien, really. This Doriath, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, I think you came up with that, but so I didn't mean to take that from you. But
that's fine. I think it's
pocket.
True.
It's just a pocket of safety,
of protection. Yeah. Well, and we know that Galadriel ended up learning a lot from Melian later on.
That's true. That is true.
So you probably figured this is where she got the idea.
Very good. Well, we've got a little bit of a closing here. I think we.
Yeah, you want to take this last paragraph?
Yeah, I do. I think this is an important closure, and we'll try to keep this under 2 hours. But new tidings were at hand, which none in Middle-earth had foreseen, neither Morgoth in his pits, nor Melian in Menegroth. For no news came out of Aman, whether by messenger or by spirit, or by vision and dream, after the death of the trees. In this same time Feanor came over the sea in the white ships of the Teleri, and landed in the firth of Drengist, and there burned the ships at Loskar. So now the timelines come together.
Yeah.
And after the trees, there's no more messages. Even Melian is going to be cut off from news from Aman, which presumably she would have been able to have some sort of access to, enough that she could tell the stories of the Valar in the weavings that were hung about.
And that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Never thought about that.
Even though she'd been there since before the Eldar had arrived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's going to be a time of silence now in that regard.
Yeah.
But we know that because we know that the Valar themselves have fenced themselves in, in an effort to keep the Noldor out. They, they're what did Mandos say to him? That we will fence you out. That we will fence Valinor against you. Not even the echo of your lamentation.
That's right. Yeah.
So and we'll find out in a couple of chapters that they literally do fence them out. That there becomes a literal physical barrier. But that's in a couple chapters.
Yep.
For now, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. And as always, Sean and I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And join us again next time when we go back to Valinor for Chapter 11 of The Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor.
Mm-hmm. And then right back to Middle-earth for the brief chapter of Men, when our ancestors will finally come on the scene. But next chapter is when the Valar will not only change the locks on the doors, but build a big security fence around the house and post the Keep Out Noldor signs. As always, if you need cheap paperbacks to mark up, please use the links on our library page at theprancingponypodcast.com. We also have links to audiobooks, music CDs, and some other cool things for your Tolkien collection.
And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play Music. We'd love it if you iTunes users take a moment to write us a review.
You know what?
We're also on Stitcher and TuneIn. Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in on this for a second. We've managed, despite our mediocre talent and faces for radio, to build a little bit of an audience here, and that's been a very pleasant surprise. But I can still count the number of iTunes reviews on two hands. Here's the thing, the more reviews we get, and hopefully we're talking about good reviews, the more we're going to show up when people search for Tolkien-related podcasts. I don't know about how that works on other platforms, and I know not everybody's an iTunes user, but if you can post reviews, please do. Throw us a few gems. Hoard them not.
Well said. Thank you, Alan. Good point. And thanks to those of you who are visiting us and commenting to us on social media. We absolutely love the community of listeners and friends we've found out there. And if you haven't joined us already, please do. Remember, this is the Prancing Pony. And just like the common room at the end, we want everybody to join in the conversation.
Yep.
So social media is how you do it. You can get current updates, listen to previous episodes, and interact directly with Alan and me on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast or on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
And social media is a great place to share our podcast as well. Retweet us, share us on your timeline, whatever it takes. Unless, of course, you prefer us toiling in anonymity. One last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or your summer party tips from Tulkas and Nessa to the Prancing Pony Podcast at gmail.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, 2 hours is still far too short a time to spend amongst such admirable listeners, but until next time.
Farewell, friends.